Well, good morning. That just means I don't know what I'm talking about. So thank you, Linda. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Academy. So I thought about this morning, and yeah, I can bamboozle you with data slides and fax plots and things like this, but I thought instead I want to tell you about what I've been involved in for the last 10 years or so. And frankly, I think this is really a revolution in health sciences, both health and disease. And I think many of you may say, why would I ever want to listen to a talk on microbes? Hang in there, because I think by the end of it, I think I will hopefully convince you that maybe there is something there to this. So, as you've heard, I've spent my life studying microbes that cause diarrhea, so I have a really perverted sense of humor, so that's why we're restricting this for fecal content. I know it's early in the morning, but we'll get there. So I want to take you back, way back to the late 1600s, when Anthony van Leeuwenhoek first made a microscope. And then what do you do when you make a microscope? Well, you look at things, right? So what he did is he swabbed out his mouth, held it up to the light in the microscope, and he saw these things that are called animalcules. And these were actually the microbes in his mouth. And he made that stunning observation that there was more microbes in his mouth than all the people living in the Netherlands, which is where he was living. That's when microbes were discovered. That was the birth of microbiology. Nobody believed the crazy Dutchman and stuff, but eventually over the years it became true, and we came to realize that there was all these little critters living in and on us. Then these two scientists came along, and a few others. Robert Koch, German, Louis Pasteur, French. They hated each other. They were competitors. But what they did is they showed microbes cause disease. Up until then, they didn't know what caused things like plague and tuberculosis and stuff. Many theories, bad air, various other things. These guys showed that these microbes cause disease. And Louis Pasteur showed that if you killed them, heated them up, pasteurized them, pasteurization, you could block disease. That was a fundamental change in our world, because now we knew that we could actually, if we killed the microbes, we can get rid of disease, and that's good. So the world went on a campaign to eliminate this world of microbes. And in the mid-40s, antibiotics really came online, and this changed the world of how we thought diseases, because now we could treat diseases that we previously could not even touch. This is a movie, it's not going to show on this computer, but basically it's showing antibiotics blowing up microbes. And this really changed the whole concept of how we treat infections and things. So if clean is good, clean is better, right? Let's go on a war against these microbes. So we started using antibiotics all the time. And in the 60s, hand sanitizer was invented. Wonderful invention. It kills 99.9% of bacteria. This is great. Let's put a hand sanitizer everywhere, outside every home, etc. So society went on this, basically this hygiene campaign, and it worked. It worked beautifully. This is a wonderful, societal story of pretty much any infectious disease you pick over the last 50 years, it's gone down. That's great. But, and there's a big but to this, the second half of the same curve, which is 50 years of humanity, we see this. And look on the right-hand side of the curve. So these are the, these are the multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, type 1 diabetes, asthma, obesity, all these diseases that when we look around our society's healthcare, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with those diseases. We're not dealing with these anymore. So we know that the kids don't no longer die of infections, but the question is, what's causing this? And this is 50 years. So this is not a long time in terms of genetic evolution. I mean, it takes hundreds of generations to actually get a mutation into the population and really select it for. We haven't changed genetically in 50 years. Something has changed. And my job this morning is to convince you that microbes have a big role in this, in our quest for this sanitation and this clean world to get rid of infectious diseases is actually impacting on these as well. Oopsie, sorry. So, when I look out into this room, what do I see? A room full of people. Right? Wrong. There are more microbes in and on you than there are human cells. I see a room full of microbes that are just sitting on top of people and inside your mouths and on your head and everything. There's more microbes in 1 gram of feces than there are people in this entire world. There's more microbes on one hand than there are people in this world. You are coated in microbes. They encode at least 100 times more genetic material than you as a Homo sapien encode. That's a profound statement for those that are working on personalized medicine. We're 99.9% identical, right? Microbes, at best, you're 50%. yet they can, and I always tell the people working on personalized medicine stuff, well, that's only like less than 1% of the genetic material. You're working on the wrong stuff. Needless to say, I don't get invited to those meetings too often. But anyway, this is a concept that's been really disturbing for us as humans to realize, yet it actually has a profound effect on us as an organism. So as I said, that the numbers, there's 100 trillion microbes living on you, and this is normal. This is how we've always lived. We don't want to admit it, but it actually really drives the philosophers nuts when you ask, say, what is being human? And then you point this out to them, and they say, well, but that's another story. So there's lots and lots of microbes living in and on you. When do you get microbes? Bottom line is you get it when you're born. You get I jokingly say, this is gross, it's early in the morning, but the very best birthday present your mother ever gives you is your very first one, and that's a big bolus of fecal and vaginal microbes. Gross as heck, but really, really important. This kick-starts the body, and that's when you first get colonized with microbes. And the first little while, microbes are bouncing around what they look like. These are compositions of the microbes. The colors represent different microbes. So they bounce around, and then any of you that had kids, grandkids, you know that when you go to solid food, there's a profound change in the gut microbes as witnessed in the diapers coming out the other end. That's when the different microbes come around. By about 2 to 3 years of age, the microbes generally stabilize. They go through a little change when you go through adolescence. And then the microbes that are with you for life. They're you, they define you, they basically, and each person is unique. There is no microbe that is conserved among all humans in this world. We all have our own different set. And really, it's determined by when you've acquired these things. Then, post-65, our microbes fall off a cliff. They go really different. And this is a fascinating area, and I'll talk about a bit at the end of this talk about healthy aging of microbes, because there's some major influences happening there. But for the most part, if you maintain your same life, you don't move to another country, you don't suddenly become a vegetarian or meat eater or something like this, your microbes are constant. They're with you for life, and it's your very unique composition that lives with you. Where are they? They're basically everywhere your body is exposed to the outside. So they're on your skin, they're in your nose, they're in your mouth. They're in the gastrointestinal tract, and basically the stomach, there's very few, small intestine more. By the time you get to the large intestine, that's where the vast majority of microbes live. They're also in the urogenital tract, armpits. They like moisture, so the moist surfaces of the body, there's more microbes than, say, on the dry skin sort of thing. But they're all over us. This is normal. This is how we've evolved. Don't freak out. No matter how much you shower, you will never sterilize yourself. It can't be done. They're just part of us. So the question is, what do they do? And that's where this whole field has gotten really interesting. So what you can see is I put up a list of various diseases that we see are major problems in our society. You could read through that list and you will recognize the major diseases in our society. Every one of these diseases, we now know that people with these diseases have different microbes than what we consider non-diseased. So they're unbalanced. We call this dysbiotic. That doesn't prove they're causing the disease, and we'll get to that, but we know that they're just different, and you can actually use this as a readout of these various diseases. So they're linked a lot with disease, but if we know that, can we actually do something about it? That takes me to my favorite topic, and that's fecal transfers. This is a Canadian audience, so those of you that watch this hour is 22 minutes. Look up the skit on fecal transfers. I swear you will never be the same. It's the funniest skit there is. I haven't tried calling this number. I have no idea what happens. So fecal transfer is what it sounds like. You basically take feces from a healthy person and put it into a diseased person. This was used especially for those that get Clostridium difficile infection. So you have hip surgery. You're going to go into the hospital. You're fed tons of antibiotics so that the surgeon doesn't have to worry about infections. What do antibiotics do? They kill microbes, right? So you basically carpet bomb your microbes. That's good for avoiding infections, but you also take all these other microbes out of the equation. Now, C. difficile is not a very good pathogen, ironically. It can't stand the competition. But if there's no competition in the room, it can then crawl in, it can then establish a serious infection. And this has been what's killing all these people in Quebec and Ontario with the C. diff infections. So here's a disease that's caused by antibiotic treatment. How do we treat a bacterial infection that's caused by antibiotics? If you try antibiotics, you can maybe cure 25% of the infection. When you do a fecal transfer, 95% cure rate. Take feces from a normal person, put it in this person, you fix it. That's a stunning revelation. Just by swapping feces, you can basically save a person's life. And that's what's really made this field exciting, because we can change the microbiome pretty easily. We can't do gene therapy, we can change microbes. And so that's why this area is really, really getting exciting. So what do these microbes do? They actually play a major part in us as an organism. They have many roles in our development, and I'll talk about these in a second, but they actually play an important role. And you do need these microbes to live. They make essential vitamins, for example, but we know they affect how the gut heals up and develops. They affect the immune system, I'll tell you about in a sec. And even the brain, I'll talk about how microbes affect brain development. So the story I'm going to tell a little bit relates to some of the work we've done in our lab, and that's how early life microbes impact how the immune system develops. So we and others have had a major role in this area, showing that microbes influence how the immune system develops. We had clues because you could take what are called germ-free mice. These are mice that they're born by cesarean section sterilely and fed sterile food and water. So they don't have any microbes. You can feed them essential vitamins and keep them alive. One of the things we noticed is their immune system really did not develop normally. So several of us have had roles in showing that early life microbes play a big role in setting up how the immune system develops. So I'm going to talk about this in the context of asthma. So when you look at asthma rates around the world, this is really a developed country disease. So the highest rates are in Canada, the US, the UK, Scotland, and this has a very high rate here, Australia. All the countries that you associate with being economically developed, right? In places like Africa and stuff, there's very little asthma. The other thing is that asthma was also on that curve I showed you at the beginning that's going up like this. When I was in school, there was one kid in the entire school that had asthma. They had a puffer, and so I thought, it must be mutant or something, right? Because now 10 to 20% of all kids have asthma. This is in this 50-year frame, so genetically we haven't changed. Something has happened. So, if you live on a farm, you have a 20% less rate of getting asthma. I love this picture. Can you imagine being a kid riding a chicken? I mean, what a great time. No wonder he's grinning, right? Okay, living a farm decreases asthma. Well, that's interesting. I wonder what that has to do with anything. Here's a really amazing statistic, at least I find it amazing. If you're born by cesarean section, as opposed by vaginal delivery, just how you stick your head in this world, you have a 20% higher rate of getting asthma by how you're born. Interesting. If you get antibiotics early in life, you have, again, a much higher rate of asthma. This has been well established now. And if you breastfeed, you decrease compared to bottle-fed asthma by about 20%. Okay, so what do all these have in common? And you can see where I'm going with this. I'm going to try and convince you microbes play a role in this. So the way I got into this is actually an interesting science story, because I had spent my life studying diarrheal pathogens. And my wife, Jane, is a pediatrician, pediatric infectious diseases doc, and I came home one night after work, and I was all excited. I was telling Jane how we used antibiotics to change the microbes in mice, and we can completely alter the outcome of an enteric diarrheal infection. And Jane kind of looked at me and said, you know, Brett, kids that get antibiotics early in life have higher rates of asthma. And it's like one of those comments that, well, first of all, you never believe your wife, right? So I run to the library the next day. Of course, Jane is right. But I couldn't find anybody had done any studies to actually prove this thing. There's an association, but no one had proved it. So it turns out in a lab next to me at UBC, Kelly McNagny's lab, he had a mouse model of asthma. So I said, well, let's do the experiment, right? So let's see what happens. And so we did that, and that that was how a guy working on diarrheal microbes suddenly got into asthma. I mean, it's funny how science works in these days. So I'm not going to go through all that on this, but the bottom line is that if you gave mice antibiotics early in life, very early in life, you could drastically alter the incidence of asthma disease. If you gave them later in life, it had no effect. And that's because this early life period is really important for the immune system developing. So we then went on to do it with something called the child cohort, which is a group of kids across Canada with asthma. And again, this is all out there now. Bottom line is, if we take the feces from a 3-month-old kid, we can look for these 4 microbes. If the kid has those 4 microbes, they're at a very, very low risk of asthma rate. If they don't have those microbes, they're at a very high risk of asthma rate. Remember, asthma doesn't happen until several years into it. But the really exciting science story was we could take those 4 microbes and then take the feces from a kid that was lacking those 4 microbes, put it into germ-free mice with or without those 4 microbes. Without those microbes, and then put it in the mouse asthma model, it got heavy asthma. When you put those 4 microbes into that mouse model with that kid feces, basically you blocked asthma. So now we're starting to get towards cause instead of correlation. These 4 microbes really seem to be affecting this. So this is now being commercialized, and we're hoping that we can get to the stage where we can take a look at a kid's microbes and say, you're missing these things, you should take these microbes. This will decrease your potential to get asthma later in life. That's where we're heading with this. If you take a 1-year-old kid, it's too late. Damage is done. And this correlated perfectly with our mouse model. It's just too late because I think the immune system has made the decision, do we go allergic or not by that time, and it's too late. So if you're in the audience now, you have asthma, sorry, I can't do anything for you. But if you have grandkids or something, maybe we can do something about that. So these microbes play a major role in weight gain. Jeff Gordon really kicked this field off when he took a fat mouse and did a fecal transfer into a thin mouse, and the thin mouse got fat. He took a thin mouse feces, put it in a fat mouse, it got thin. He took fat people's feces, put it in thin mice, they got fat, just by switching feces. I'm not saying going in a fecal transfer by your thin neighbor, but you can see where this can go, right? And as we know, childhood obesity is a major issue now, and we can see this in kids and their fecal microbes all the time. And the bottom line with obese kids and adults is their microbes are really, really good at generating energy per food unit input. Thin people, ironically, their microbes are actually not so good at generating energy. But of course, it's chicken and egg too with what you're eating. Inflammatory bowel diseases, that's Crohn's, colitis, you know about these things. There's strong links to the microbes and affecting them. And in the case of ulcerative colitis, there's actually some very nice evidence coming out that fecal transfers under some conditions can really, really actually improve this disease. It's not the panacea it was with C. diff, but that's because the gut is inflamed, it's on fire, you're putting these microbes in, you're asking them to put out the fire, get rid of all the resident microbes, and do a major change. And what the bottom line is that it turns out that it really depends on the donor. And you can see where this is going. If we can identify the beneficial microbes and only those, we can put those in without all the other goop that goes with these fecal transfers. Ironically, getting back to fecal transfers, the only adverse clinical reaction that's ever been reported is these 2 twin sisters. One was obese, but healthy, and the other had Crohn's and she was thin. She got a fecal transfer from her sister. They fixed the Crohn's, but the sister got obese. So that's, microbes in action. I'm not going to say a lot about this, but this is an area that my lab has spent a lot of time on, and this actually just really got us into the world where we can do fecal transfers between mice that are resistant to disease, infectious enteric disease, diarrhea, and those that are susceptible, and we can actually change the outcome of a disease of diarrheal infection just by switching the microbes. And this has major implications as we work with diarrhea and other things around the world. So another fascinating area, and this is just exploding now, is what we call the gut-brain axis. So the brain tells the gut what to do, we know that, but now we realize the microbes in the gut actually can talk to the brain. And there's some really interesting stuff coming out on autism. They have different microbes, a few studies showing fecal transfers can change autism, etc. If you take an anxious, a stressed, or a depressed mouse, do a fecal transfer into a normal mouse, that normal mouse becomes anxious, stressed, or depressed just by switching the feces. That's stunning, that doing this. And there's lots of other studies coming out on this, and this is an area I think that's going to hold huge future in terms of neurosciences and things. These microbes are talking to the brain, and we have to figure out how. So really, in terms of raising kids and stuff, what I think is we have to get over this, I call it the hygiene hangover. If clean's good, cleaner's better, right? I just rode on a plane back from someplace in the States, and this woman beside me, she had a little kid. She used hand sanitizer on the kid 23 times in a 4.5-hour flight. I gave her a copy of the book and said, no, don't do this. But really, we have to balance it. Yes, we've got to use hygiene when there's infections around. If there's diarrhea at the daycare, of course you should wash your hands and things. If you should use hand sanitizer outside the cancer wards in hospital settings, of course you should. But you don't need it in the playground. You don't need a bottle of Purell hanging off the diaper bag and wipe the kids' hands every time they go down a slide. So that's one thing I think we really have to think about and raise our kids. But my guess is many of you are not young parents anymore. I don't think the average age in the audience is young parents. You may have grandkids. I want to spend the last few minutes talking about the other bookend of life, and that's healthy aging with your microbes. So I wrote this book on Let Them Eat Dirt, and everyone said, well, I've had my kids, what about me? And that's what I want to talk about a little bit here. And this is where I think there's really exciting, profound changes coming. So here's a morbid list. Here's the top 10 reasons why you're going to die. When you look through this list, how many are microbes? Microbial involved. The third from the bottom, influenza and pneumonia. We know that's microbes, right? But heart disease, cancer, lung diseases, these aren't microbes, are they? I can now provide convincing evidence that 9 of these 10 have strong microbial links. 5 years ago, you say you're nuts. Well, some people still say I'm nuts, but it's coming. The only one we can't is accidents. You can't say the microbes made me do it yet. We talked about the brain a bit. So just to give you some examples, cardiovascular disease, that's heart attacks and strokes, right? When you eat red meat, who breaks down the red meat? You don't. The microbes do. They actually take phosphocholine, which is a molecule, and forms something called trimethylamine. That then gets oxidized in your liver, called trimethylamine oxide. That's basically what causes cardiovascular disease. If you take germ-free mice, no microbes, feed them all the red meat you want, you don't get cardiovascular disease. They also don't get dental cavities, by the way. So, okay. But I think the neatest thing is, at least in mice, if you drug these microbial enzymes that do that first step, they don't get cardiovascular disease. So in theory, you should be able to eat a steak, take a pill that knocks out these drug the bugs kind of thing, and you should actually be able to impact on cardiovascular disease. That's coming, and that's coming fast. Here's something you can do now. Diet. When I say microbes, in the gut especially, that's gut microbes, that's diet. Those two go hand in hand. We see the world we live in through a veneer of microbes, and they filter everything, especially with what you eat. So here's something called the MIND diet. It's basically the DASH diet and the Mediterranean diet combined. If you follow this diet, 3 beautiful studies now come out saying you can drop your Alzheimer's rate by 53%. What's on the diet? It's the stuff your mother told you should eat. That's fruits, nuts, vegetables. You can have a glass of red wine, just one. Do that. And stay away from red meat, butter, cheese, fast-fried foods. White sugar, white flour are the enemies of our society because they induce all these microbes. So I'm just going to finish up on one final story that I've been privileged that I've been funded with a foundation grant, so really that means that A, I don't have to write another grant, and B, I can do whatever the heck I want. And this is where I'm really excited because we've now moved into Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's disease, that's, the stupor, that's a brain disease. If I asked any of you here, you say, yeah, that's a brain disease, right? Actually, it looks like Parkinson's starts in the gut about 20 years before we ever see it as a brain disease. So a major risk factor for Parkinson's disease is constipation. Red meat is a major risk factor for it. Coffee is 20% protective. Yay, because coffee keeps you motile in the morning and presumably prevents this. So this all came out when there was a study coming out, I think it was Denmark, where they cut the vagus nerve, which is the nerves that hooks the gut to the brain. They did that to decrease ulcer pain in these people. It turns out when they did that, these people had way less levels of Parkinson's. What does cutting the gut-brain connection have to do with Parkinson's? No one believed the study. It was a nice study, but no one believed it. They did it 2 more times, and other groups did it and found the same thing. So there's a real connection between the gut and the brain. And there's now been several studies coming out showing that you can find differences in people with Parkinson's and normal in their microbes. We kind of expect that. There's just a really neat study that just came out where they actually took feces from 3 people with Parkinson's and their spouses who didn't have Parkinson's, put them into a mouse model. And when you do that, you basically, the Parky feces triggered Parkinson's in the mouse model, the normal feces didn't. So we've been working this area, and we can now take a look at certain microbes, and we can, with 85% confidence, predict whether that person has Parkinson's or not, just based on their gut microbial composition. So you can see where this goes, that we can look at people who are at risk, change their microbes, et cetera, and maybe impact on this neurological disease. I think Parkinson's starts in the gut, and then eventually, as it moves up into the brain, we see it as a brain disease, but actually maybe a gut disease. So what I've done is taken sort of a romp through my world. I hope I've tried to convince you that these microbes do have many roles to play, especially in early life and then later in life. So here's the book we were talking about. This is, if you want to know more about it, if you're going to have grandkids or you got to go to a shower or whatever, this is a book. It's based on the science, but it's written so the average person can understand it. And my quest is to convince young mothers and fathers to let that kid put that stone in the mouth in the playground. You don't need the hand sanitizer all the time type thing. I think we have to change how society behaves and embrace our microbes instead of trying to kill them all at all times. And then, for those of you interested in healthy aging, this is coming out in early next year. I wrote this with my daughter, who's just finished a PhD in geriatrics and geography, and this is really the other end of life. What can you do to shift your microbes to actually improve your health? And there's some really astounding data on how these microbes interface with all aspects of our health and disease. So, thank you very much.
Well, fantastic. Just Brett, on behalf of all of us at the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences, thank you so much for your terrific lecture and also for your truly splendid contributions to science. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. Awesome.